Hello, friends. If you, like me, are fascinated by history, airplanes, and incredible tales of how ingenuity and willpower can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds, then you've come to the right place. Imagine this scenario. In the sky, there is a perfect, almost magical machine, light as a feather and agile as a bird of prey. And pitted against it is a crude, heavy, outdated iron monster. And all bets are placed on the former. Yet, it is the second one that carves its name into legend. How? Today, we will dive into one of the most thrilling chapters of World War II, where tactics, the genius of one man, and the iron will of pilots rewrote the rules of aerial combat. Don't go anywhere. Ahead lies the real story of the Flying Tigers, and it's worth reading to the very end. And yes, at the finish, I have an important request for you. But more on that later. Let's begin. A shadow on the horizon. It was 1941. The world was already ablaze in the fires of World War II, but for the United States, it still felt like a distant, foreign drama. However, on the other side of the Pacific, in the skies over China and Southeast Asia, the fate of entire continents was already being decided. The Empire of Japan, driven by a thirst for resources and territorial expansion, seemed unstoppable. Its fleet dominated the seas, and in the air reigned a specter that struck fear into the hearts of any Allied pilot. The Mitsubishi A6M fighter, better known as the Zero. The Zero was not just an airplane. It was the embodiment of Japanese philosophy and engineering of that era. Lightweight, to give you an idea, it weighed almost half as much as its main adversaries. Incredibly maneuverable with phenomenal range. It could literally dance in the sky, getting on the tail of any Allied fighter in a classic dogfight. Close-quarters maneuvering combat. Its weaknesses, the lack of pilot armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, seemed insignificant in the early war years compared to its overwhelming superiority. Zero pilots were an elite, raised in the spirit of the samurai code, Bushido, and they were confident in their invincibility. And against this backdrop appears it. Not the newest, not the fastest, not the most maneuverable. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, an American fighter that many already considered obsolescent by the time the U.S. entered the war. Compared to the elegant Zero, it seemed like a blunt instrument, heavy with a less-than-stellar climb rate, with an Allison engine that lost power at high altitudes. If the Zero was a fencing foil, the P-40 was a heavy battle axe. And one question tormented everyone. How could this axe defeat a virtuoso fencer? The answer to this question was given by a man whom headquarters considered a stubborn upstart and his ideas, heresy. His name was Claire Lee Chennault, a retired captain in the United States Army Air Corps, suffering from deafness and partial loss of his voice, yet possessing a brilliant tactical mind and an iron will. He served as an advisor in China and saw with his own eyes how Japanese aviation operated with impunity in the skies. And he saw not only the Zero's strength but also its weaknesses. Chennault became that very architect who took the rough stone of the P-40 and shaped it to shatter the fragile porcelain of Japanese air power. Thus was born the American Volunteer Group, AVG, the legendary Flying Tigers. This was not a regular army unit. It was an adventurous, almost piratical project. Pilots and mechanics were hired on contract from the ranks of the U.S. Army Air Forces and Navy with huge salaries, $500 to $700 a month, a fortune at the time, and a bonus for every confirmed Japanese aircraft shot down. Their mission: to protect China and the Burma Road, the last artery supplying the country that had been resisting Japan since 1937. But what could they possibly pit against the Zero in their P-40s? Chennault's answer was not technology, but tactics. He wrote a new Bible of aerial combat for his Tigers that went against all established doctrines. Tactics, boom and zoom. Imagine you are a hunter. Your prey is a herd of fast, agile antelope. You cannot compete with them in a straight sprint or in maneuverability. But you have an advantage. You can take a position on a high cliff, pick a target, and, gaining speed in a dive, deliver one crushing blow, then use your momentum to climb back to altitude. This is precisely how Chennault's tactic, known as boom and zoom, worked. Chennault forbade his pilots from engaging in horizontal turning fights with the Zero. That was suicide. Instead, he bet on the P-40's strengths: high diving speed and structural strength. The heavy P-40 could dive faster and longer than the lightweight Zero, whose controls would literally lock up at high speeds. Heavy armament: 6.50 caliber, 12.7 mm, Browning M2 machine guns on later models, whereas the Zero had two 20mm cannons, powerful but with a low rate of fire and limited ammunition, and two 7.7 mm machine guns. The dense, concentrated hail of lead from the P-40 was deadly for the virtually unarmored Zero. Often, one accurate burst was enough. Protection: armor plating behind the pilot and self-sealing fuel tanks. A P-40 pilot had a much greater chance of surviving a hit than a Zero pilot, whose aircraft would often burst into flames from a single incendiary bullet. The Flying Tiger's pilots trained to work in pairs, attack only from an altitude advantage, deliver one precise strike, and leave without lingering. Their motto was, "If you see a Zero, never turn with it. Gain altitude, dive, attack, and break away." The genius was not in the sky, but on the ground, the early warning system. But tactics were only half the formula. The other half was an unprecedented system of command and control for its time. Chennault created a network of ground observers across China, thousands of Chinese peasants, partisans, and soldiers stationed on hills, in villages, along flight routes. They were armed with telephones and primitive radios. This human radar network relayed messages to the Tiger's headquarters: 40 enemy bombers, course for Kunming, altitude 5,000 meters. The P-40 fighters did not scramble aimlessly or maintain constant patrols. They lacked the resources for that, but instead intercepted the enemy at the right place and the right time. This gave them a decisive advantage: the ability to gain the advantageous altitude before the enemy arrived and to attack from ambush. Historical and economic context. Why China? To understand the full scale of the Flying Tiger's feat, one must grasp the context. China had been at war with Japan since 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War. It was a brutal, protracted conflict. The United States, officially neutral, provided economic aid to China via Lend-Lease Acts. But how to deliver the supplies? The main route was the Burma Road, a mountain serpentine linking Burma, under British control, with China. Seizing this road was a key Japanese objective. The Flying Tigers were hired, in essence, to protect this strategic artery. Their funding came through American government loans to China and Chennault's personal connections with Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek. This was a unique example of a privatized air force operating in the interests of another country on the eve of a major war. Baptism by fire and tactical evolution. December 20th, 1941. Just 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, 10 Japanese Mitsubishi Ki-21 bombers appeared over the city of Kunming. They flew without fighter escort, confident in their dominance. They did not know that hundreds of eyes from ground observers were watching them. At the signal from the ground, the Tigers scrambled. Using the boom and zoom tactic, they fell upon the bomber formation. It was not a battle but a rout. 9 out of 10 aircraft were shot down. Tiger losses, 0. The myth of Japanese air invincibility was shattered in a single day. But the Japanese learned quickly. They began escorting their bombers with Zeros. And then Chennault and his pilots devised a new tactic: the decoy. One pair of P-40s would simulate an attack, luring the Zeros after them and forcing them to drop their external fuel tanks, which increased maneuverability but shortened fuel range. At that moment, the main group of Tigers, waiting up high, would dive on the distracted Japanese, clearing the way to the defenseless bombers. Numbers and myths. The exact number of Flying Tiger's victories is debated. Officially, they claimed nearly 300 confirmed aircraft shot down in 7 months of combat. Some sources, including Chinese ones, cite numbers up to 1,000. The important thing is not the number itself but the ratio. They lost only 12 to 16 of their own pilots in aerial combat. Such an incredible victory-to-loss ratio, around 20 to 1, was possible only thanks to Chennault's tactics. They did not outturn the Zero in a dogfight. they outsmarted it. They turned its advantage, maneuverability, into a trap, luring Japanese pilots into a fight on their own terms. Legacy and finale. By the summer of 1942, the American Volunteer Group was disbanded. Its pilots and mechanics were offered to join the regular United States Army Air Forces, the 14th Air Force, under the command of the same Chenault. But the spirit of freebooters could no longer be forced into the rigid framework of military regulations. Many Tigers left, unwilling to exchange their proven tactics for standard Army doctrine. Their era, short but incredibly bright, had ended. Yet their legacy changed the course of the air war in the Pacific. The lessons written in blood over the skies of China and Burma were studied. Tactics are more important than technology. Even in the best aircraft, without sound tactics, you are a target. Know your machine's strengths and the enemy's weaknesses. Don't try to hit the enemy where he is strong. Command, control, and intelligence are force multipliers. The aircraft is only part of the air defense system. When new American fighters rose into the skies of the Pacific, Lightnings, Corsairs, and finally Mustangs, their pilots no longer charged head-on into a turning fight with the Zero. They used the tactics born on the heavy P-40s. Speed, altitude, a powerful strike, and disengagement. The Zero gradually transformed from a fearsome hunter into prey. So what do we have in the end? A story about how an outdated, seemingly inferior fighter became a formidable weapon. But this is not a story about an airplane. It is a story about people. About the stubborn genius Chenault who saw what others did not. About the daring volunteer pilots who risked everything for an idea and good money. About the thousands of unknown Chinese observers who became the eyes of this incredible machine. This is a lesson for all time. There is no such thing as an absolute weapon. There are minds capable of changing the rules of the game. The Zero was the perfect aircraft for the war the Japanese had envisioned. But the Tigers and the P-40 forced them to fight the war they had devised. They proved that in the confrontation of foil versus battle axe, it is not the weapon that wins, but the mind of the one who wields it. If this story gripped you as much as it did me, if you want more such deep, well-researched, and captivating content on this channel, support us. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, write in the comments. What other legendary weapon or tactical maneuver would you like me to analyze in such detail? Your opinion and interest are what drive us forward. Let's engage and remember history together. Thank you for staying with us until the end.